Well, hello, and welcome to the Astrology Channel. I am Joe G. I'm an astrologer and a Mercury fanboy. And as always, I'm out here with my good friend Kyle Pierce. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, Georgie. I'm Kyle, and Saturn is my Lord and Savior.
Nice. Lord of Time. Hopefully, you're keeping track of time, Kyle, because I'm curious what's happening this week.
This week, the Sun will apply to a trine with Mars. Mercury is retrograde, and we get a new moon in Sagittarius, square Saturn. Deceptively few aspects to maybe point to, but I think it's actually a pretty eventful week nonetheless.
Simple and straightforward.
That's exactly what this week is going to be, everyone. Simple and straightforward. Get ready for the simplicity to just wash over you.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But anyways, moving on to our Monday. It is November 25th. As always, it is Tuesday. The moon is winning in Libra, out of element in her own decade in Saturn's terms, trying to Pluto, moving towards a Sun sextile, a conjunction to the South Node, and Mars sextile. It is a busy day for the moon. You're gonna notice that the moon is kind of closing in a series of sextiles. So we have the Sun in Sagittarius, the moon in Libra, Mars in Leo, and then Jupiter in Gemini. And these signs kind of like build on the sequence of sextiles. And that was the thing that I was leaning on mostly for the day. And you can even kind of see it in the image. I just have like this lady with her eyes closed, and behind her, there's like a whole bunch of people kind of like holding hands and feeling kind of like it feels like a kumbaya sort of moment. But I don't think it's kumbaya is like really the vibe necessarily. But the thing that I found interesting is that the moon is really close to the south node and is also waning. So it's more like the tendency will be towards maybe dampening some of that excess heat that comes with these signs. So it's a bit less kumbaya and more so just blowing off some steam or like finding a little bit of a center in that chaos, which I like for the day.
Yes. Deliberate exhales, I think, which can be very soothing. I think with the South Node, the moon's like really trying to offload emotional stress or just trying to adapt to a charged environment by being civil or by trying to identify points where we don't disagree and maybe just kind of breathing out really hard when we happen to see the ones we don't like, or just kind of choosing to let it go, like sleep on it, close your eyes. I don't need to look at that. And you don't actually have to look at all of it. There's a lot to look at, but I think the moon here is kind of pointing to being chill and not antagonizing, what's already feels like kind of charged.
And for that reason, we settled at a 2 difficulty for the day. It's not entirely troublesome. Take a deep breath. That's the utility of today. We gave it a 3, so lean on that. Kyle,
Yeah.
who is really needing that breath today?
Oh, no one in particular.
Just the entire world.
Yeah, I think the cardinal signs in particular are finding maybe a moment of peace or finding the environment a little bit easier to make peace with.
Nice. Well, moving on to November 26th, or Tuesday. Mars is in Leo, out of element, in Saturn's decan, and in Venus's terms, and being received by the Sun through a trine.
Mars is, getting this trine from the sun. The sun is, ruling Mars and saying, yes, go forth and, kick ass, bro. And Mars is like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. And for some reason, Mars just can't, like, what's going on? Why can't I get going forward on things? And I think Pluto's recent final entrance into Aquarius might point to a little bit of at least what Mars's experience is right now, too. That while that trine is really obvious, that, oh, fuck, like, it's back again. Like the tension that kind of went away for a while is like starting to feel a little louder. And Mars can't actually get going away from it. It wants to move on, but Pluto's just calling to him. So there's a bit of a like, I want to go forth, but circumstances are pulling me back into something else.
Yeah, and I think that that's what I tried to capture with the image too, because a couple, I think maybe months back by now, we had Mars early in Cancer be received by the Moon, and we had an image of this child warrior in this river being received by his mother, and his mother gifts him a sword. And then now Mars has entered Leo, and the person that is handing him a new weapon is not the moon, it's the sun. And I really wanted to contrast those two images because one thing that come with the moon reception is that it tends to feel a lot more welcoming and a lot more comfortable in a way. But I think that the sun, especially through this trine, can bring a bit of the urgency and the pride. You got to fight for your kingdom, or you got to just, like, I know that you're a child, but you just got to do it for honor or whatever. Whereas the moon might have been more focused on Mars's own needs. I think with the sun trine, we're prioritizing the goal. There's something about that doesn't feel too exciting for me because I think that we're still dealing with some of those topics of maybe being unprepared, especially with Mars going retrograde, or maybe having a lack of resources. It's not going to be like a fun experience for Mars. But then having the sun kind of just like stoke this flame of like, just go for it, you can do it, raises some red flags. So I think that the advice for the day is just to, like feel that determination, but also be careful not to let that determination become recklessness where you're prioritizing your goals or the finish line before your own needs, because as Mars goes back into Cancer, those needs will become a lot more relevant again. And for that reason, we gave it a 2.5 difficulty because Mars is not really impeded by anything right now. We're getting close to the station degree, but Trine is very supportive. So we really have a lot more utility than anything. We set a lot of 3.5. I think the thing is just to use that energy wisely and really think about it long term, not today. But Kyle, who is really addressing these questions today?
It's a lot of Leo and Scorpio and Aries. Feeling the inspiration, but maybe not being a lot of ability to act on it quite yet. There are other uses for inspiration too.
Moving on to November 27th. This is our Wednesday, Mercury's day. Mercury is in Sagittarius, out of sect and detriment in Saturn's decan in terms, sextile the moon, and retrograde. I don't have too much to say about today because we've already been talking about this Mercury Jupiter story for some time. I think the moment right now is a lot more focused on just being at the end of Sagittarius and then all of a sudden having to stop and go retrograde. I feel like in the image, I just have Mercury, maybe with all the newspapers that and all the headlines that I was gonna run with, and these are gonna make the money here. These are the headlines. We got all of them, and then all of a sudden there's more and more and more stuff coming in, and what was exciting before and what was even maybe inspiring is now becoming burdensome and heavy, and it's just you're trying your best to just keep it all together.
There's a sense that maybe we're burnt out on the news cycle. Maybe we're a little too inundated with facts that we're starting to realize that there are maybe internal contradictions to some of the narratives that we've been sold. But I think Mercury right now is having to go back on some of the messaging. It's having to spin a new narrative. That smile is starting to feel harder to keep on. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of a shriek of pain, maybe trying to be suppressed and maybe reworked. There's a sense of panic and trying to save the enthusiasm, even though we're having to reassess the facts on the ground. But there's so much data. It's not the lack of information that's the source of the problem. It's actually there's just way too much information, and figuring out what's true, what isn't, is definitely not easily accessible.
Yeah, I feel like the sense of overwhelm is just the big thing to sit with for the day, and that's why we really we're a little generous on the difficulty scale. We give it a 4 difficulty for today. Return to Monday's vibe. Just take a deep breath and just tune out for a bit. Maybe go a little slower on these scrolling frenzies. But utility for today is at 2. It's kind of like not that much. But Kyle, who needs this break more than anybody else, actually?
Well, Mercury definitely needs a break. I think because it's definitely the mutable signs. We're really everything about this points to the mutable signs, and it's going to be pretty noticeable there. It's pretty dramatic.
And it doesn't look like it's going to be much of a change going to Thursday, November 28th. It is Jupiter's day. Jupiter is in Gemini and detriment in his element. And Mars is second in terms, moving towards an opposition to the Sun and also retrograde.
So, Jupiter in Gemini, we're in mutual reception with Mercury. Mercury, received some new data or just realized that the message needs to change, but we need data to back it up. And Jupiter is sort of already overloaded with data as well. That's kind of Jupiter and Gemini's deal. We're overloaded with information. What's bullshit? What's not? But there's a bit of strain being put on Jupiter here, I think, where it not only is working as like holder of the data, but also the collator, or the one who has to weave it into a cohesive whole, because the contradictions in the story are becoming apparent, and Jupiter is being tasked with reconciling that. And Mercury is being a little picky. There's like a crisis of narrative.
Yeah. And I think one of the ways that Jupiter might try to do that is actually by going back to some of the facts of the past or something that like maybe was overlooked in the chaos of it all. Because I found it was really interesting to look at this day in reference back to one of the biggest transits that we had this summer, which was the T square with Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and literally everybody else. I think that even the new moon was involved in that whole ordeal. And around that time, we were talking about how Jupiter was just beginning to be faced with this ocean of boxes, or like this ocean of different things that he needed to get to. Jupiter eventually figured it out. It opened all the boxes. Everything kind of just started to flow again. But then Jupiter went retrograde. There was an issue with the machine that was assembled. And now Jupiter's still trying to fix what that machine is. Let's say it's the information machine. and so in this image, I have Jupiter going back to some of those boxes that might have been overlooked in the chaos of it all. Maybe there was a fact or like this really important event that was overlooked because everything else was happening and something felt bigger than the next. That's why I have Jupiter just, kneeling down, opening a box, finding a new gear. Maybe that's the gear that the machine is missing, and maybe things will start running again. I don't think it will be as simple as today, just like finding that thing. But there's also the implementation process and all of those things. That's why we kind of almost met in the middle, the difficulty and utilities for the day. It's a 2.5 difficulty and a 3 utility, so there is a lot that can actually be done. But some of the difficulty might just be sifting through some of that mental overwhelm that Mercury is experiencing, but I think it's fair to say that Jupiter has been experiencing it for a lot longer. But Kyle, who is our Jupiter of the day, I guess?
Mutable signs. Still mutable.
Moving on to our Friday, it's November 29th. It's Venus's day. Venus is still in Capricorn, and her element in the sun's decan and her own terms, sextile the moon, and soon receiving Uranus through a trine. So today was a cool day to sit with because it really made me think back to the Uranus video that we did about Uranus in the terms of Saturn and where it is. Because one of the biggest things that we were talking about with that one is just this idea of scrutinizing some of the innovations of the recent past and seeing how useful they actually are, how useful they're not, and where are they harmful, where are they not harmful. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of that into this one. In that image, we had Uranus kind of just like scrutinizing a metal stick. But in this one, I have Venus and Lady Saturn, or lesbians of last week, still having nice tender moment, not eating a metal steak, but cooking something in a metal cage, which is a microwave in this case. I was wanting to capture with this image the sense of using innovations or technologies to bring a bit of comfort or just bring a little bit of a sense of unity to a situation so they can really sit in each other's company and maybe find ways to improve each other's lives.
Venus in Capricorn, last decade, it's kind of looking at everything that we built together, gazing in appreciation at the results of our labors and, wow, we're so hot after working so hard. We built a lot of muscle, looking good. Also, shouldn't we be like proud of ourselves for everything that we've endured? But Uranus is conjunct Algol, and while they're trine, their disposition towards creation is very different. Uranus conjunct Algol is very much deconstructive in its approach to society. It's trying to pull apart elements of civilization on some level. And Venus is saying yes, and maybe overseeing and cooperating with that in some way. There's a sort of affirmation of the idea that something maybe has to go or something ugly has to be radically released. Venus is kind of looking at both of them and like, yeah, I think it's time, guys. Let's cut it loose. There's an ability to detach and like, oh yeah, let it go and maybe it'll come back or whatever. But also a pragmatic understanding that, to move forward, we have to let go, or we have to let something maybe not burn, but collapse in on itself. I would say that that's can be potentially very useful. And there's something distinctly mature and grown up about Venus this month in general. I like Venus a lot right now, but there's a sort of contrasting approach that Venus is speaking to.
Yeah, and that's why we didn't go too difficult on today. There's a lot there that can yield very interesting results. So we set out a 2 difficulty for today and a 3.5 utility. There is a lot that can be done here, but it might just be a little bit. You might just get thrown in a little bit of a curveball. Just be ready for that.
Yeah.
But Kyle, who is doing that today?
I think we're really noticing it in Capricorn, Taurus, and Libra. Venus can see all of those signs and very specific events, like maybe being described in that space.
Nice. No mutables today. See, we're diversified. On a less exciting note, going back to the mutables is a Saturn's day. Saturn is in Pisces, out of element, Peregrine, in Jupiter's decadent terms, soon being received by the moon through a square, while the sun moves towards the same square a little bit later on.
To some degree, I think Saturn is a little bit linked in with this story. However, or at least this relationship with Venus, they're kind of entwined. But I think Saturn's put in sort of an awkward position where its kind of main tactic is kind of like passive resistance or like just sort of dragging its feet while, it's receiving instructions or, receiving a spin or narrative that it is square to, it's a T-square to all that Sagittarius Gemini action. So it disagrees, and it doesn't have total power to impose control over the other planets. So it's just kind of doing okay and like doing the bare minimum to cooperate just enough to meet immediate demands, but trying to just resist what's happening, which, can be very useful. It actually can be a very effective strategy. So Gandhi used it very well, right? If you have children, you're probably familiar with it well, and it can definitely slow down your operations. But it doesn't necessarily get Saturn's agenda fully on board, at least not immediately. Saturn's relying on Venus to implement a more coherent strategy. Saturn is kind of just holding the line right now.
Yeah. I really feel like, especially in everything you're saying, that's about the peregrine-ness of Saturn right now, because Saturn will continue to be peregrine until the very end of Pisces. The story that I've been kind of running with Saturn is that we had this Mars-Saturn conjunction around the same spot that Saturn is right now. Mars and Saturn wreaked havoc in Pisces land, and now Saturn is revisiting that spot after everybody has rebuilt that place. Things look entirely different. And so Saturn kind of has to somehow bow down to these new structures to be able to reintegrate itself into that space. And now we have the new moon square to Saturn. And the sun and the moon are usually the royalty of astrology. And so I was imagining that Saturn is kind of walking towards an audition with the queen and king of that Piscean place to try and plead her case as to why she should be let back in. And I think that that's the tension of the square is Saturn having to recognize a lack of the ability to have a say on how things should go and should be run. And I imagine there's a small sense of being let in, but under these very strict boundaries.
Saturn's peregrineness is totally at play. However, I think with the mutual reception with Venus, it makes that useful in some way, or it makes it part of a more cohesive plan. And I think there's a lot here that speaks to adapting to when the tides aren't in your favor at a particular moment, or when the pendulum swings one way. Sometimes that's just time to let it swing that way, wait for its momentum to spin out, and then your time will come. And you can be sad about it, and you can, be forced to endure it. But there's a way that that period of time can be one where clarity is gained, or connections with those who are closer to you might be nourished and strengthened.
Yeah. And on that note, it's clearly not the easiest stuff. But there's still, I don't know. I feel like this is one of those days where the utility and difficulty score can be somewhat deceiving because we settled at a 2.5 difficulty and a 1.5 utility. But like we
Mhm.
said, like that lack of agency right now or that lack of utility can actually be used in your favor if you're smart about it. And I think it's
Is it?
even interesting that Saturn is about to re-enter Mercury's bounds, which are mercurial. It's about playing with the rules a little bit and strategizing and doing some creative thinking, especially in Pisces. Mhm. So, yeah, do some of that. Anyways, Kyle, who is bending the rules, I guess?
Saturn and Pisces and Capricorn are certainly engaged in a creative use of knowledge of where boundaries exist and where they don't, or where you have to bend and where you can maybe squish through the cracks.
Sweet. Well,
Yes.
closing our week, it's New Moon's Day. Nice. On the first day of December. What a way to start the month. It's the Sun in Sagittarius in his element in Mercury's decan and Jupiter's terms, conjunct the moon, which means it's a new moon, and moving towards the Saturn square that we were talking about. And now we get to see the perspective of the king and the queen. I think it's interesting because we've been talking about this self righteousness with Sagittarius. And we've also been talking about the Sun and Mars trine and how that trine might incite a little bit of an angsty vibe. Some might even say it's a little violent, if you will. Maybe even ideas around justifying the rage that Mars is contributing to, or justifying some of that violence, or maybe like justifying why you're pushing this old lady that came on a boat to your island back into the ocean instead of just like helping her. Uh, um, which has some interesting parallels with what's going on in the world. So in the image, I have king and queen hopping on a horse. If you remember last week, the king had just left the cave, abandoned his crown for a sword. And I think that we're just building on that story now because the king now has retrieved his queen, doesn't quite have a kingdom yet, but he has his army back. And that I think that is the point of contention for me. This new moon does provide a lot of energy and a lot of determination and a lot of just like the verve to go conquer and do these things. But the question is conquering the answer, or could there be a different way about going about this? If today you're having a surge of inspiration to do a certain thing, are you one of those people who will lean towards achieving something at all costs, or are you willing to maybe compromise and take a deep breath before you really go for it?
Yeah, I can't help but find something like a little amusing about the sun's situation during the new moon. There's the sort of surface level sense if you're just like looking at the king right on the sun. he's barking out orders. He's so sure about what he wants to happen. He's got his golden armor on and his fancy baton or whatever. And he's like, all right, men, we march. And he starts marching, but like the army is maybe dragging their feet, or they're confused about the orders, or they're whatever reason not really moving, but the sun's kind of not paying attention. Just kind of like, yeah, I'm glorious, aren't I? Look at all this power I have. And then the moon's there. Yep. All right, I'm going to go out and materialize that shit that you were saying to do. But it immediately encounters Saturn, that square. And while the sun overall is like more powerful than Saturn, its agenda is being stalled. And nothing else is really actively supporting the sun or like listening to his orders or following through on them. So I think from the sun's perspective, it maybe feels like you have a lot of power, or there could be situations where you feel like you have one, or somebody feels like they have a lot, but the mechanisms of power just aren't quite following suit.
And for those reasons, we gave today a 3.5 difficulty. We almost meshed it evenly because I think we also have to be careful not to overstate the difficulty of this new moon, because there's also a lot that can be done with it, because the sun does well in fire signs in general. So it's a 3.5 difficulty and a 3 utility. But Kyle, who should be paying attention to today?
I think we're definitely seeing this in Sagittarius, maybe broadly in mutable signs, and then certainly I think in Leo for sure.
This is our week, so let's take a look at our week at a glance. On Monday, we're not singing Kumbaya, but we're taking a deep breath, which is nice.
Tuesday, the sun's speech is very inspiring and morale is high, but maybe we're encountering that the enemy is actually deeply, deeply entrenched and loaded with machine guns, and maybe we don't quite want to charge headfirst.
On Wednesday, Mercury is kind of getting burnt out with all these headlines and stories that feel like they need to be told, and everybody wants to be talking about something.
Yeah, Thursday, we're doing what we can to detach from the narrative so that we can hopefully get a better read on what the hell is actually going on.
On Friday, maybe thinking about innovative ways of fixing problems, but also getting ready for some surprises along the way.
Saturday, we may not like what's going on, but we can at least drag our heels deliberately and passively resist what's going on.
On Sunday, we're trying to give orders. Some of them are being listened to. Some are maybe not. But let's take a look at our difficulty and utility ratings for the week. It looks pretty wobbly for the most part, especially on the difficulty end of things. Seems like Wednesday, we kind of peak on difficulty. And maybe Tuesday, Friday are kind of like our best utility days. But overall, utility kind of wobbles the most, I think, throughout the week. So just maybe take our Tuesday with a grain of salt, but still can be useful. And then Friday, I guess, also take it with a grain of salt, but it can also be useful.
Yeah. So that's our simple week. Pretty straightforward, I think.
Oh my God. I need to come back with that.
That callback. How the pros do it. Yeah. It averages out to about a 3. But, it's a weird time. We're sort of in between high points of the narrative. But I think that's why you come watch us. Because if you focus on the day-to-day, every day is not super hard most of the time, even if you're in a more difficult period. But there's definitely ways to work with what's going on, and life goes on. You'll be all right. Try to enjoy the week.
Are definitely some good moments in there, so shouldn't be too hard. But if you would like to get a reading with me, I am Joe G, and you can find me at themercuryrising.com.
You would like to get a reading with me or buy a Saturn is my Lord and Savior t-shirt, you can find me at KylePierceAstrologer.com.
Nice. All caps.
Real Saturn.
Enjoy your week.
Enjoy your week.
Until next time.